Hey there, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for another episode of Mortal Realms Monday. So for today's episode we're going to be taking a look at an alternate paint scheme for the Stormcast Eternals. As issue 8 didn't come with any new miniatures, just the 3 Sequitors and 2 Castigators, there's nothing really new to show you to paint today, so I thought we'd go ahead and paint the Stormblood Guard, I do believe they're called. Their armour is primarily silver with red robes, gold trimming on the shoulder guards and black detailing. So you've got the silver legs on both sides and the helmet, then the gold trim on the helmet and the shoulder guards there. The robe itself, front and back, is going to be red with the small area here. The pauldrons will also be red. The chest piece here and the tabard down the front and the hood on the back are going to be a white, and then obviously we'll have a few other colours for the rest of the miniature. So first of all we're going to take some Abaddon black and paint in behind the knee here and anywhere else that is going to be silver or gold. So that's all the leg, the back area here, the belt, the trim of the pauldron and all of the helmet. It will just be the white and red areas of the robes and tabards that will be left with our prime coat. So once you have all the black done, it should look something like this. So we've got all the primed areas ready for the gold and silver detailing. So next we're going to take some Mephiston red, and this will be thinned down slightly and used for the shoulder pauldrons and the main robe itself, leaving the tabard and the hood in the original primer ready to paint white. So you can see nice and thin down paint here, goes on super smooth, and just painting up the trim and that. Now I have sped up the video here. I did do the recording with audio only. Once again I had the mic muted, so I've sped up the video to do a voiceover. So here I'm just showing that the arms I've left unattached so that we can get to this area behind them rather than splodging paint in areas that we don't want. And I usually paint the arms and the weapon separate to the rest of the model and then attach it at the end. So if you'd like to get on with yours, we'll be back in just a bit. Okay, so once we have all the red done, it should look something like this. And now what we're going to do is paint in the shadow areas. I decided for this miniature and this video to show how to paint without using pre-made washes or too many pre-made washes. The only one I think I use is non-oil toward the end. So what I've done here is taken some of the Abaddon black and I'm mixing it with the Mephiston red, about a 1:4 or 1:3 ratio. So 1 part black and then 3 or 4 parts of the red. I'm just looking to get a slightly darker tone of the red, sort of mute it down slightly for the shadow areas. Right, so I'm having my light come from the top left slightly of the model, so it means that the sort of the bottom right of any folds, creases and things like that in the robe are going to be painted with this darker colour. So you can see there it's just a shade or two darker than the robe itself, and on this side obviously we're going to have heavier shadows, thicker shadows, as they are directly away from the light source. The same with down on the under area here. Anywhere where the light source really can't reach, you're going to have hard edge shadows. So just after a fold peaks and then comes back down on itself, that will be the shadow, and then obviously the peak and the other side will be the lighter colour. So you can see on the back here I'm just sort of marking in where I want all the dark areas. Anywhere where there's going to be a soft transition between the light and the dark, I'll put in with the dark, as you can see here, and then I'll go back in with a few glazes of the Mephiston red and sort of blend the two together, going just over the transition line just to soften it up. But I will show that when we get to it. So in this part of the video I decided to go through the whole process rather than sort of letting you do your bit and then come back, just so you can see exactly how I apply my sort of shadow areas. I'm showing here that the light was coming from the top left, which means the underside of this robe was also going to be darker, as well as the area around the where it sort of meets a new piece of material or armour, just to put some depth in there. So again, I'm using slightly thinned down paint so I can build this shade up. I didn't want to go too heavy and too dark. If you thin the paint down, there's less pigment in there, so you can build your shades up a bit better than just slapping in the strong colour and then regretting it. As you can see here, I'm just sort of feathering over the top and sort of bringing it out over the lighter red area and building up the dark tones in the shadow areas. You can see here that the what I was showing was you could see the light reflecting off the wet areas, which means I wasn't going to go back over it. If you go back over the wet areas, you'll just pull the paint up and you end up with sort of watermarks and things like that. So now I'm mixing up a slightly darker red, and I'm using this just for where the pauldron meets the rim of the guard, the shoulder guard. So there's sort of a small gap in there. I just wanted to get some darker red down in there just to sort of push that depth a little bit. And then I'm using some of that to go back in and darken up those sort of real dark areas where the light really won't catch. So just in sort of the deepest area of the folds there, again just around the crease there as it joins, and then underneath in the dark areas of the robe there, and again on the right hand side of the folds there. And then here I just use this as a sort of wash and just sort of put it over these leathery bits in the middle here, just to get it down into the gaps between them and sort of tint up the leather a little bit. So now I'm just sort of smoothing it out slightly. As it's thinned down, it's more like a glaze, so I'm now just sort of trying to get that smoother transition. So now I'm going to take some of the base Mephiston again. This is just a pure Mephiston red, and I've thinned it down to almost a glaze consistency, and now I'm going back over any areas that I want to be that brighter red. So obviously the left side of any folds, going up to the peak, and any of the larger flat areas, and also where a shadow in a crease becomes flatter and the crease disappears. Obviously that needs to be a smooth transition from the shadow to the light. So again, just using layers and thin glazes, I'm just smoothing out those softer edges for the transitions. So obviously the left hand side and the tops of all these areas, and the top of the peak here. You can see I've got a little bit of red on the knee there, but that doesn't matter. Obviously that's got to go silver yet, and we'll just touch that up with the black afterwards. Don't worry too much about getting paint in areas you don't want. As long as you haven't done that area, it's not a problem, especially with black. You can just go straight over it. Now obviously we've got some of these edges on the folds up the top there. Now with the pauldron, as you can see here, I'm just now blending in that transition from the dark to the Mephiston red, going over the whole thing just to blend it all up. And you can also see that I didn't paint the hammer and thunderbolts there, or lightning bolts, as they're so thin and not so raised that if I painted them black, the red would just go straight over the top of them anyway. So I decided it's better to leave them, paint the red in, get the pauldrons done, and then I can carefully place the black in over the top once the red's all done. So I think here I'm using some, yep, there's some Evil Sun Scarlet. This is a slightly lighter red, and this is going to be for the uppermost raised edges, and then I'm going to blend that down into the Mephiston red, leaving some of the Mephiston between the shadow and the brighter red. So anywhere that's definitely on the left hand side is going to be this, as well as the top edges, and then you can see here just painting there, but I've left the right hand side of that with the Mephiston. And again, once this is on, I will go back in with the Mephiston red, thin down and blend them together. This again is like we did for the shadows, it's just more the sort of the extreme light area, just so we can see where our light and darks are going to be. So just on the bottom half of this, the light will catch, but towards the top of it, it wouldn't, as the top half would put it into shadow. So at all times, you know, you have to be aware of where your light source is coming from, what objects are going to be in the way of that light source from the miniature itself, so that you can tell where your shadows and your highlights should be, where the light is going to creep past a particular object and cast some light onto an area. So now with the shoulder pauldrons, obviously they're a slightly spherical shape, they're sort of domed, so I'm just putting a cylindrical highlight on there, again ignoring that the emblem is there. It would still have the reflection in the same place, albeit slightly distorted around the emblem itself. So now I'm just thinning out that Mephiston red and blending this back up, getting rid of some of that hard transition and softening it up. Now this is thinned down, so it's not going on opaque and covering what we've already done. It's just transitioning the colour, making it a bit smoother. And as you can see here, I'm just going around that highlight and doing the same thing, blending that back down into the Mephiston and into the darker mix that we made up around it. And then again, just brightening up some of that red in the centre of it. Right, now using some of the red there and pulling the brush back through it so that it flattens the brush out, I'm just using the edge to pick off the sharp edges of the robe. This is where the final highlights will be, so we're just bringing that up slightly, and obviously the same on the front here. And then just picking off some of the edges around this the leathery part at the front there. Right, so now with some Wild Rider Red. This is just for the extreme highlights now, which is where we've just put the Evil Sun Scarlet. So mixing that in slightly as it's a little bit towards the orangey pink side, and we want it a little bit more red, so just mixing a small amount of that in, sort of a 50-50 ratio. And now just picking off the sharpest edges where the light would pick up on there. So obviously the Y section of the fold up the top here, and this one, and then the bottom half of the robes. There's the top half. Although it will pick up some light, it will still be a little bit in shadow from his pauldrons and his back, which is why we've used the Evil Sun Scarlet for the top half of the highlight, and then this mix for the bottom half. Alright, and again going back over the leathery pieces and just picking off where the light is going to catch the most. Thinning it down slightly and just applying a small amount in the centre area of the pauldron here. Obviously that's going to stand out a little bit, so I will blend that back in with the Evil Sun Scarlet, and then just picking off a little bit of this edge here. And you can see now we have some nice deep shadows in those deep areas, and then a smoother transition from the darker reds to the light red, or the mid red. The camera doesn't pick it up brilliantly, but I will put a photo up at the end of the finished model so you guys can see exactly what it looks like. I should really replace the camera with a better quality one, but at the minute funds just don't allow it. So again, going back in with some thin down red, and now I'm just smoothing the transitions out between the two, and also going to highlight the top of this ridge here on the top of the pauldrons. Okay, so now I'm going to take some Othwan Grey and just give a straight flat coat over the front tabard and the chest piece, as well as his hood. It's, as you can see, is slightly thinned down, and this is going to be white, but the Othwan Grey will give us the mid-tone so that we can use a pure white for the highlights. In that way, the white tabard will actually look white rather than unpainted. And then again we'll do the same thing with a slightly darker grey for the shadow areas, and then whites for our highlight. Right, so next we're going to take some Dawnstone and mixing this in with the Othwan Grey. Roughly a 50-50 mix, maybe slightly more with the Othwan. Again, same with the red, we want it just slightly darker than the base colour, your mid-tone. And same again, we're going to apply this to the right side of any folds and darker areas. You could say that this would be the underside of the robe. I wanted the whole of the tabard to be white on the inside and outside, so this would still have shadow. If you're doing it a different colour, then obviously you can put a different colour in there for that part. Now obviously the light isn't going to get on the underside of the knee, just the same as we did with the red robe, and down in the creases there. Now you can see I've gone slightly higher there. That's because we're going to soften that transition down, like I was on about earlier with the hard edges and soft edges. we'll transition that into a soft edge. Obviously the underside here is going to be in shadow, more so on the right side than the left, but the left will still be under a bit of shadow, so we'll put that in there. And again, you can see that these are hard shadows. They do come right up to a solid point, and they are underneath where the light source would be. Obviously I'm making sure that I get the underside of the robe. I'm just trying to get that right up against that red edge very carefully without hitting into the red, and then again just building this up. And I will say that the transitions from a light grey to a dark grey is a little bit harder to do with sort of washes and glazes and layers, as it tends to always leave a hard edge, whether it's the dark on top of the light or the light on top of the dark. So I'm just putting down some more Ulthuan grey there, thinning it down as much as possible without the pigments separating. And now I'm going blending just the top edge as that starts to flatten out, so that we got the smoother transition between the darker grey and the Ulthuan. This does take a bit of practice, this, as well as a lot of backwards and forwards, carefully blending the two greys at that meeting point. Obviously you're going down onto the flat edge there where the light would catch it again, and then just neatening up those edges, coming across the top of the edge there, the raised edge. And now I'm just going to smooth off this transition between the light and the dark. So again, going backwards and forwards between the Ulthuan grey and the darker grey, just blending them together with the layering or the glazing, depending on how you want to look at it. And again, I wasn't quite happy with the transition on this area, so backwards and forwards between the two until I'm at a point where I'm happy that the transition is barely visible. Okay, so what I'm now doing is taking some, I do think that is, let's have a look, that's the White Scar White, and I'm just going over the uppermost raised edges there, so going back in and blending that as it rounds off slightly at the bottom there. Just checking again that my soft shadows blend in to the mid-tone. And then doing the same on the small hood at the back there, just highlighting up with some of the Ulthuan grey, neatening that back up. Alright, so here's the White Scar. So now what I'm doing is pulling the brush back through the paint, which flattens the bristles out, and then just using the side of the bristles, I'm just touching the areas where the light would hit the most, so it wouldn't hit the tops of peaks that are underneath the knee in shadow, but it would catch the edges of peaks everywhere else. I wasn't too happy with the paint there. It did go onto the shadow area slightly, so just wiped it off with my thumb, just trying to get it right. You don't want too thick a line, you just want a nice crisp highlight there. I'm just using the very end of the bristles here just to touch them onto the edge of the folds there. Right, so I think that was that done for the white there. So as you can see, it looks white with shadow rather than white primed or grey primed. If you work with greys, building them up to white, sort of light greys, building them up to white highlights, it makes it look like a white material. So now we're going to take some Xandri dust, and we're going to use this for the scroll banner piece there. So just going to give this again a flat coat straight over the top of everything, and obviously not worrying about getting it into the indents of the engraving letters there. And obviously you want to be very careful not to get any of this paint onto the red that we've already brought to a finish, as that wouldn't be too nice having to try and touch that up. So you could either do what I've done and just be very careful up against those edges, or you could do these sort of smaller areas first and then go in and finish your more detailed areas like the red once all the smaller pieces have been done. But as long as you're careful, it shouldn't be a problem. And again, this is sped up. This is at twice the speed, so it's at 200%. So I don't usually paint that fast. I think in total this model took me around about an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes, including obviously stopping, talking, making sure that things were right, even though the mic was muted. But yeah, so I'd say a model like this to this level of detail would take about an hour and 20 minutes. Right, so now we're going to take some Mournfang Brown, and we're going to thin this down to a wash consistency, and we're going to use this as a wash over the scroll area there. Now normally I would use a Seraphim Sapia for this, but like I said, I'm trying to show what you can do if you have limited paints and you don't want to spend money on washes and glazes and everything else, that you can do this without it. So just carefully getting a lot of this watered down paint into the letters. What this does is essentially fills it up level with the top of the letter with this brown, and as that dries, that then settles down as the water evaporates and stains the inside just like a wash would. So on the back, I'm going over the majority of the scroll here, as that would be in shadow, and then I think I decided to do the same with the majority of this that would be in shadow, just to sort of darken it up a little bit. Just going back over to make sure that the letters were filled there. Right, so now that had dried, I've taken some Ushapti bone here, and I'm just not so much dry brushing, as there is a little bit more paint on the brush than there would be normally for a dry brush, but I am being very careful to just get it on all the highlight edges as well as some of the larger areas between the lettering. There's not so much paint on there that you would be able to paint a large area with this, but there is enough, a little bit more than a dry brush. So obviously just be careful not to get it into the indents and the recesses. If you do, it's not too much of a problem. Just finish the area up and then go back in with the watered down Mournfang Brown and black mix, just to darken them recesses back up again. There you go, that's the Ushapti bone. So my mistake on that wasn't Ushapti bone, that was me going back in with the Xandri dust first over the top of it. Like I said, this was recorded, and then after going to edit it, I found that I'd not recorded the audio. So now with the Ushapti bone, I'm just picking off some random highlights, sort of the bottom edge of some of the letters, obviously all along the top of the scroll. Not in so much complete straight lines, these are broken lines that I'm doing, You don't want the highlight to be one long line, otherwise I find it doesn't look as realistic. Right, so now we're going to do the gold, and for this I'm using some Retributor armour, and we're just going to give this a couple of coats over the gold areas. So that's the shoulder pauldron here, the halo part of the helmet, and the other shoulder pauldron, as well as the emblem on his shoulder guard. Now I don't worry too much with the gold if it goes into that recess on the other side of the lip there into the red, as I can just drop some of that dark red back in there and neaten that up. So obviously making sure that I've got the underside here. Right, so I'll go ahead and get on with doing the gold on the pauldrons and the halo part of his helmet, as well as his shoulder emblem there, and we'll be back in just a bit. Right, so once all the gold is done, I'm going to take some more of that Mournfan brown and thin it down slightly, and I'm just going to mix in some of the gold there. And what we're doing is looking for a brownish gold, you know, just a bit of sparkle in the brown, and we're going to use this for our shadow areas. I mix a small amount of the red in there. And what we're going to do is just gently glaze over the top of the gold and make sure that it sort of pulls into the dips in the corners there. This is where our shadow is going to be. The majority is in these corners, and obviously we're just staining the gold on the highlighted areas. So now normally I would use a Reichland Flesh Shade gloss for this, but again we're trying to do this without using a huge amount of paints or washes and glazes and things like that. So just bringing it down and making sure that we get down into those corners, and then obviously just making sure that we pull some of that watered down paint off the bristles and into the gold on the halo there, and then making sure that we get the underside done as well. Okay, so once the brown has had time to dry, I'm going to take some of the Retributor armour and just go from the highlight area, so the top of the curve of the pauldrons, and then just gently feather it down into that recess in the corner there. So what I'm doing here is a little hard to explain, but I'm applying a bit of pressure on the top of the pauldron, and as I get down into that shadow area I'm getting lighter and lighter, so it's almost feathering the gold in there without applying too much. And then I'm just going around the trim of the armour. I think here I'm just showing about the shadows. They are looking nice, so I noticed that the camera was picking up the shadows and that a lot better than it was earlier in the recording. So just showing that the light source was coming from the top left, so we've got all those shadows on the right hand side, and then this nice sharp highlights on the peaks of everything. So next we're going to take some Iron Breaker, and we're now going to move on to the armour itself. For this you could use Lead Belcher, or you could mix a small amount of black, a 1:4 ratio of black to Iron Breaker, and you'll get a similar tone to the Lead Belcher. And we're just going to apply this over all of the armour. So that'll be the legs, his back just above his belt, and his helmet. And you can see here I'm just trying to leave a dark area between the steps of the boot, the feet, but I think I end up deciding to just place in the Iron Breaker over everything, and then I can get those recesses and shaded areas picked out with a wash. So obviously the area behind the knee is black. That looked like I had painted it then, but that was just reflection. And then everything else is silver. I think the only recess that I don't paint in is the one between the kneecap and the shin guard. So just making sure that I get a nice couple of even layers of this. So I'll go ahead and finish painting this all silver, and we'll come back in just a bit. Right, so once that's done, it should look something like this. So now I'm going to take some Nuln oil. Again, this is the only wash that I use for this, pre-made wash. I find a watered down black doesn't quite have the same effect. So I'm just starting by getting it into any of the recesses, just sort of in the deeper areas and any areas that I want shadow. So inside that calf muscle there, and just down in this edge here where the light is away from the area there. So I'm applying it similar to a paint rather than a wash, just gently getting into the dark areas, and then anything that's in shadow, the same thing, I'll be applying it just over the armour. Obviously this goes over anything that is silver, so the back of his neck, his helmet, his boots and his arms. Obviously whilst doing this I am doing the weapon off to the side. The technique for that is exactly the same. Anywhere that is gold will be done in the same way, anywhere that is silver on his hands and that will be done in the same way, and then the handle for the weapon is done with the Mephiston red, and then a dry brush of the Evil Sun Scarlet. So now I'm just carefully working out where my shading is going to go. Right, so now that's had time to dry, I'm going back in with some thinned down iron breaker and just picking off the highlight areas where the sun would catch the armour. So I'm leaving some of the armour with that sort of darker metallic look, just painting around the edge there, obviously the top of the feet. And the back of the calf muscle there, as it's rounded, it will have some of this highlight colour. Now this isn't the final highlight, this is just the metallic, the mid-tone, sorry, that's what I'm trying to say. So again on the bulge of that inside calf muscle, and then inside the shin there, the top of the helmet, top of the nose, and the bottom of the eyes or top of the cheeks. And again with the feet there, just being careful not to go into any of the darkened areas that we've built with the Nuln oil. Obviously just picking off the elbow here, and then again I do the same with this with the weapon itself. Alright, so here I'm just taking some Stormhost silver, and this is going to be used for our extreme highlight on both the gold and the silver areas. So just carefully picking off the very high curve of the shoulder pauldrons there, being careful not to go down into the bottom curve, using a slightly sort of broken up line along it, and then the same with the helmet, just a small sort of circle on the top of the helmet there, and then just a small area on the knee, and then just carefully picking off some edge highlights where I think lighting would hit. So right on the edge of these areas. Now it doesn't show up too well on the camera, but it does give a slightly different sort of tone to the silver that is already there. Alright, so once that's done, we're going to take some Teclis blue, and this is going to be used for the soul shard, I think they call it, this little vial that he has on his belt. And so yeah, just a straight over Teclis blue, and then we'll apply a small highlight on top of that with some Lothan blue and some white. So obviously being careful not to go over anything that I've already done, and just making sure we get nice and clean there, make sure we get full coverage. Right, so that's the Lothan blue, and now I'm just going to apply this to the corners, edges of the vial there. Now I think that at some point I decide I'm not overly happy with the front of it there, that sort of covered up too much of the area, so I went back in and reapplied it. And I'm just trying to fill in the gap between with the Teclis blue. So just applying some silver to the bottle cap there. And now we're not too far off from done with this. So just applying some white and just gently sort of stippling it down just to get a bit of a broken highlight down a couple of the sharp edges there. And there you go guys, the finished result. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please hit that thumbs up and subscribe button, and also the little bell so you get notifications of future videos. Please check out my other social media, links for that are all down in the description there, and I will catch you for the next episode of Mortal Realms Monday. Take it easy guys, thanks a lot.